A grieving widow falls asleep on the Duke's shoulder after the ball and wakes up married to him at dawn. She thought the worst night of her life was behind her. Then she woke up, married to a stranger. Hello, lovely. If you're drawn to stories of unexpected second chances, grief transformed into grace, and love born from the most impossible circumstances, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more tales of hope, healing, and hearts finding their way home. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. 1. The chandeliers of Lady Pemberton's ballroom burned too bright for Daphine Lorne's tired eyes. Each crystal drop caught the candlelight and threw it back 1,000 times over, creating a glittering assault that made her head pound. She pressed her gloved fingers to her temple and wished, not for the first time that evening, that she had stayed home. But widows, in their first year of mourning, could not simply stay home forever. Society had rules, even for grief. 6 months of full mourning, then 6 months of half mourning. Tonight marked her first venture back into the world that had once felt familiar but now seemed alien and exhausting. The winter charity ball was meant to be gentle, her friend Harriet had promised. Just a quiet evening, a few familiar faces, a chance to remember she still existed beyond the walls of her small townhouse and the endless shipping ledgers she pored over each night. Daphine had believed her. She should have known better. The ballroom spun with colour and noise. Women in jewel-toned gowns swirled past like living paintings. Men in evening dress clustered near the card rooms, their laughter sharp and foreign. The orchestra played something cheerful that grated against the dull ache in her chest that never quite went away. She accepted a glass of punch from a hovering footman, grateful for something to do with her hands. The hostess, Lady Pemberton, descended upon her immediately, eyes bright with sympathetic concern that felt more intrusive than kind. "My dear Mrs. Lorne, how wonderful to see you among us again. You look lovely, though perhaps a touch pale. Are you quite well? Do have some punch. It's particularly fortifying tonight." Daphine managed a smile. "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. I'm perfectly well." Of course, of course. Such strength you show, my dear. Your late husband would be so proud. Now, you must circulate. It won't do to stand alone in corners all evening." Before Daphine could protest, Lady Pemberton had pressed another glass of punch into her hand and swept away to terrorise some other unfortunate guest. Daphine stared at the 2 glasses, confused about how she'd ended up holding both. She set one down on a nearby table and sipped the other. The punch was sweet and strong, warming her throat as it went down, perhaps too strong. She should eat something, but the thought of navigating the supper room, of making conversation with people who would either ignore her widowhood or smother her with pity, felt impossible. The room grew warmer. The noise pressed against her skull. Daphine's exhaustion, held at bay for weeks through sheer stubborn will, crashed over her like a wave. She hadn't slept properly in months. Every night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through shipping manifests in her head to avoid thinking about the empty space beside her in bed. She needed air. She needed quiet. She needed to sit down before she fell down. Daphine slipped through the crowd, searching for an alcove, a window seat, anywhere she might catch her breath. The ballroom seemed to stretch endlessly, each doorway leading only to more glittering people and more suffocating warmth. Finally, she spotted it. A quieter corner near the back of the room, partially obscured by a potted palm. A chair sat in shadow, away from the worst of the noise and light. perfect. She sank into it with a sigh of relief, closing her eyes just for a moment, just to rest, just to gather herself before she had to smile and nod and pretend to be a person again. The chair was surprisingly comfortable and warm, almost like it had arms, almost like those arms shifted slightly as she leaned against them. The thought drifted through her foggy mind, but exhaustion dragged her under before she could properly examine it. The noise faded, the light dimmed behind her eyelids. For the first time in months, Daphine Lorne fell into genuine sleep. She dreamed of nothing. Blessed, empty nothing. When she woke, the ballroom had gone quiet. Not completely silent. She could still hear the faint strains of music from somewhere distant, the murmur of voices, but the quality of sound had changed. Fewer people, less laughter, and something else. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness even before she opened her eyes. People were staring at her. Daphine's eyes flew open. She found herself looking up at an unfamiliar ceiling, her head resting against something solid and warm that definitely was not a chairback. Her cheek pressed against fine wool fabric. She could hear a heartbeat, steady and calm, entirely too close to her ear. Horror flooded through her, shocking her fully awake. She jerked upright and found herself staring into the face of a man she'd never met. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and darker eyes that studied her with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and concern. His evening clothes were impeccable, marking him as wealthy, titled, or both. And she had been sleeping against his shoulder like a child on a long carriage ride. "Good evening," he said quietly. His voice was low and cultured, with a hint of warmth that surprised her. Or rather, "Good early morning. You've been asleep for some time." Daphine scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering. The room spun briefly before steadying. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to make sense of what had happened, how she had ended up sleeping on a stranger in the middle of a ballroom. Around them, a small crowd had gathered. She recognized Lady Pemberton, her face pale with shock. Harriet stood nearby, wringing her hands. And others, so many others, all watching with the kind of avid interest that meant only one thing: scandal. "Oh dear," Lady Pemberton breathed, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Oh dear, this is most unfortunate indeed." The man who had served as Daphine's inadvertent pillow rose smoothly to his feet. He was tall, she realized, and moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to command. He looked at Lady Pemberton with an expression that could have frozen water. "I fail to see what is unfortunate about a exhausted widow finding a moment's rest, Lady Pemberton." "But your Grace," people saw. They saw her, sleeping against you, in the shadows, for nearly an hour. "The talk will be dreadful. Her reputation," the man said coldly, "is that of a grieving widow who has done nothing wrong." "Your Grace." The words penetrated Daphine's shock. She had fallen asleep on a duke. Not just any wealthy gentleman, but a duke. She wanted to sink through the floor and disappear entirely. "Forgive me," she managed, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what happened. I was so tired, and the punch was likely stronger than you realized," he finished gently. "No blame attaches to you, Mrs. Lorne." He knew her name. How did he know her name? Lady Pemberton fluttered forward, her hands twisting together. "But your Grace, the proprieties. People will talk. They already are talking. Something must be done to preserve." "Nothing needs to be done," Daphine interrupted, finding her voice through the fog of exhaustion and humiliation. "I fell asleep. It was an accident. Surely reasonable people will understand that." But even as she said it, she could see the faces around her, the calculating looks, the whispered conversations already beginning. London society thrived on scandal, and a widow sleeping against a bachelor duke, even innocently, was exactly the kind of fuel gossip needed to burn for months. Her chest tightened. She had barely survived the past year. The grief, the loneliness, the crushing weight of taking over her late husband's shipping business, when his brother proved too overwhelmed to manage it. She had no energy left to fight scandal, no strength to withstand the cutting remarks and cold shoulders that would follow if her name was dragged through the mud. "Mrs. Lorne," the Duke said quietly, "might I have a word? Privately?" She looked up at him, this stranger whose shoulder had become her accidental refuge, and found something unexpected in his dark eyes. Not pity, not disgust. Just a calm steadiness that made her want to trust him, even though she knew better than to trust anyone anymore. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, of course." He offered his arm, and she took it, grateful for the support. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, whether from the punch or the shock or simple exhaustion, she couldn't say. They walked through the crowd, which parted before them like water. Daphine kept her chin up, her spine straight, even as she felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. The Duke led her to a small parlour off the main ballroom, where a fire burned low in the grate, and the noise of the ball faded to a distant murmur. He closed the door, muffling the voices outside. In the sudden quiet, Daphine found she could breathe again. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I don't know how to apologize enough for what happened. I never meant—" "You were exhausted and unwell," he interrupted gently. "You sought a place to rest. There is nothing to apologize for." "But people saw. Your reputation will survive, I assure you." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I'm Sebastian Harwood, Duke of Kentmere, and I am notoriously difficult to scandalize." Daphine stared at him. The Duke of Kentmere. She'd heard the name, of course. Everyone had. He was famously private, rarely attending social events, known more for his political writings than his presence in ballrooms. What he was doing at Lady Pemberton's charity ball, she couldn't imagine. "Then why," she asked slowly, "is Lady Pemberton acting as though the sky is falling?" His smile faded. "Because your reputation is more fragile than mine. A duke may do as he pleases with minimal consequence. A widow, especially one still in mourning, is held to rather different standards." The truth of it hit her like cold water. He was right. He would walk away from this evening with nothing more than an amusing anecdote. She would be whispered about, speculated over, possibly cut by the more conservative members of society. Her business connections, already strained by her gender and her grief, might suffer further. "I see," she said quietly. "However," Sebastian continued, his tone careful, "there may be a way to transform this from a scandal into simply an unusual circumstance." Daphine looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if we were engaged, or better yet married, no one could claim impropriety. A woman may sleep on her husband's shoulder without causing comment." For a moment, Daphine thought she had misheard him. Then his words arranged themselves into sense, and she realized he was entirely serious. "You're suggesting we marry," she said flatly, "because I accidentally fell asleep on you." "I'm suggesting we marry to protect you from the consequences of accidentally falling asleep on me," he corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Daphine felt hysterical laughter bubbling in her throat and forced it down. "Your Grace, we don't know each other. This is madness." "Perhaps. But it's practical madness." He studied her face. "Mrs. Lorne, I have no interest in forcing you into anything. But I want you to understand what you're facing if we do nothing. The gossip will be relentless. Your business dealings may suffer. And you've been through enough without adding this burden." Daphine wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could weather the scandal, that she was strong enough to face down whatever society threw at her. But she was so tired, so desperately, bone-deep tired. And he was offering her a way out. "What would you gain from this arrangement?" she asked. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Honesty? My sister has been pressuring me to marry for years. This would solve that particular problem. And I find that I admire a woman practical enough to fall asleep rather than endure a tedious ball." Despite everything, Daphine felt a smile tug at her mouth. It was a very tedious ball. "Dreadful," he agreed. "I was considering escape myself when you appeared." They stood in the firelight, two strangers contemplating an impossible decision. Outside, Daphine could hear Lady Pemberton's voice raised in agitation. Time was running out. Soon the decision would be made for her by gossip and speculation. She thought of her empty house, her sleepless nights, the weight of carrying on alone while everyone watched to see if she would break. She thought of scandal added to grief, one more impossible thing to survive. And she thought of this man, this Duke, who had offered her kindness when he could have simply walked away. "If we did this," she said slowly, "what would you expect? From the marriage, I mean." "Very little," Sebastian said quietly. "Separate residences, if you prefer. No obligations beyond what we agree to. And when the gossip dies down, we could arrange a quiet separation, discreet, amicable." It was a business arrangement then. Not a marriage, a temporary solution to an embarrassing problem. Daphine understood business arrangements. She'd been running one for months, keeping her late husband's shipping firm afloat through sheer stubborn determination. "And if I refuse," she asked, "if I choose to face the scandal alone, then I'll support you in that choice however I can." His voice was steady. "But Mrs. Lorne, I think you're too tired to fight this battle right now. And there's no shame in accepting help." He was right. God help her. He was right. Daphine closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." When she opened her eyes, Sebastian was smiling, not triumphantly, just warmly, as though she'd given him a gift instead of solving a problem. "Then let's find a vicar," he said, offering his arm once more. "Before the sun rises and we both come to our senses." By dawn, under candlelight and cold breath, with Sebastian's sister and Harriet as witnesses, Daphine Lorne signed a marriage license that transformed her from widow to duchess in the space of a heartbeat. The church bells rang out over London as the first light touched the horizon, and Daphine realized she had gone from sleeping on a stranger's shoulder to waking as his wife in a single impossible night. 2. Morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Daphine woke in her own bed, in her own house, and spent several confused seconds wondering if the entire previous night had been some elaborate fever dream. Then she saw the marriage license on her bedside table, her signature dark and certain at the bottom, and knew it had been terribly, impossibly real. She was married, again, to a man she'd met approximately 6 hours ago. The urge to pull the covers over her head and refuse to face the day was overwhelming. But Daphine had spent the past year learning that grief and responsibility waited for no one. She could hide, or she could move forward. Those were the only choices life offered. She chose forward. The breakfast invitation arrived at 9 o'clock, delivered by a footman in the Kentmere livery. The Duke requested the pleasure of her company at his townhouse, at her earliest convenience. The note was brief and formal, but someone had added a postscript in different handwriting. "Please come. I promise it's not as dreadful as you imagine. Margaret." Margaret must be the sister who had witnessed their hasty wedding. Daphine remembered a tall woman with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she found the entire situation more amusing than scandalous. Daphine dressed carefully in a day dress of dove grey, still respecting her mourning period, even as she navigated this bizarre new circumstance. Her maid, Ellen, worked in pointed silence, radiating disapproval. The whole household knew, of course. Servants always knew everything. The Kentmere townhouse in Mayfair was elegant without being ostentatious. Daphine was shown to a breakfast room that faced a small garden where early spring flowers were just beginning to brave the cold. Sebastian sat at the table, reading a newspaper, dressed casually in shirt sleeves and waistcoat. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Mrs. Lorne, or rather, Your Grace, I haven't quite adjusted to that yet." "Neither have I," Daphine admitted. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover this was all a particularly vivid nightmare. If it's a nightmare, at least it has decent food." He gestured to the sideboard, where breakfast was laid out. "Please, help yourself." Daphine filled a plate with porridge and toast, her stomach uncertain, but her practical nature insisting she eat. They sat in awkward silence for several moments, the scrape of cutlery against china the only sound. "This is absurd," Daphine said finally. Sebastian looked up from his eggs. "Completely absurd. I don't even know if you prefer tea or coffee." "Coffee. Strong and black. You?" "Tea. With far too much sugar." "Noted." He set down his fork. "Perhaps we should establish some rules for how this arrangement will work." "Yes, rules." Daphine felt herself relaxing slightly. Rules she could work with. Business arrangements made sense. "I should be clear about what I expect, or rather, what I don't expect." "Go on." "I don't expect this to be a real marriage," she said bluntly. "I mean no disrespect, but I buried my husband 8 months ago. I'm not ready to replace him. I'm not sure I ever will be." Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes, but he simply nodded. "Understood. I have no intention of forcing intimacy or obligation. We can maintain separate residences. I assume you want to return to your own house." "I do. I have my late husband's business to manage. His brother is trying, but he's overwhelmed, and if I don't keep the shipping routes organized, the whole firm will collapse." "You run a shipping business?" Interest sharpened his voice. "I do the accounting and routing. I always have, even before Thomas died. He handled the personal side, charming the captains and investors. I handled the numbers." She paused. "I'm better with numbers than people. That makes 2 of us." They shared a brief smile of understanding. Then Sebastian said, "What else?" "The right to dissolve this arrangement quietly when the gossip cools," Daphine continued. "I appreciate what you've done truly, but I won't hold you to a permanent mistake made to preserve my reputation." "Is that how you see yourself? As a mistake?" The gentleness in his question made her throat tight. "I see this situation as a mistake. I dragged you into scandal through my own carelessness." "You dragged no one. You fell asleep." Sebastian set down his coffee cup. "Mrs. Lorne, forgive me. I should call you Daphine if we're to be married, even temporarily. Only if I may call you Sebastian." "Please do." He leaned back in his chair. "Daphine, I want to be very clear about something. I didn't offer marriage out of pity or obligation. I offered it because the alternative was watching you be destroyed by gossip for something that wasn't your fault, and because I find that I like your company. You're practical, intelligent, and refreshingly honest. Those qualities are rare." Daphine didn't know what to say to that. She settled for, "Thank you." "So, here are my terms," Sebastian continued. "We maintain this marriage publicly. We make appearances together when necessary, to establish credibility. But privately, you have complete freedom. Keep your house, run your business, live your life. When you're ready to end this arrangement, we'll do so discreetly." It was more generous than she dared hope, more generous than she deserved. "And what do you get from this arrangement?" she asked. "My sister stops trying to marry me off to vapid debutantes. My mother stops despairing of grandchildren, at least temporarily. And I get the pleasure of occasional intelligent conversation, if you're willing. You write political essays, don't you? Under a pseudonym?" His eyebrows rose. "How did you know?" "My late husband subscribed to the Political Observer. I recognized your writing style. You have a very particular way of constructing arguments." "You read political essays?" "I read everything. It passes the time when you can't sleep." Something warm entered Sebastian's expression. "You know, I think this arrangement might work out rather well." The door opened and a woman swept in, tall and elegant, with the same dark hair and sharp eyes as Sebastian. This must be Margaret. "Excellent. You're both here and you haven't killed each other yet. That's promising." She helped herself to tea and settled at the table. "Now we need to discuss strategy." "Strategy?" Daphine echoed. "For handling society's response. The gossip mills are already churning. By tomorrow, everyone will be speculating about how you trapped poor Sebastian into marriage." "I didn't trap anyone," Daphine said sharply. "I know that. Sebastian knows that. But society needs a narrative, and they'll create one if we don't give them something better." "What do you suggest?" Sebastian asked. Margaret smiled. "We give them a love story, not a scandal but a romance. A duke who's been searching for the right woman and finally found her. A widow who's found unexpected second chances. It's perfect, really. Society adores a romantic tale." "But it's not true," Daphine protested. "Truth is flexible," Margaret said cheerfully. "What matters is what people believe, and if we present a unified front showing that you're genuinely fond of each other, the gossip will die down much faster." "She's right," Sebastian said reluctantly. "Scandal feeds on mystery and wrongdoing. Give society a sweet story and they'll lose interest." "So we pretend to be in love," Daphine said flatly. "Or simply pretend to enjoy each other's company. Which doesn't seem so difficult, does it?" Daphine looked at this man, who had become her husband overnight. He met her gaze steadily, and she found herself thinking that, no, it wouldn't be difficult to pretend to enjoy his company. The pretending part would be unnecessary. "All right," she said. "What do we do first?" "First," Margaret announced, "we take you both to the museum tomorrow. Nothing scandalous, just a civilized outing for a newly married couple. Sebastian can show off his appalling knowledge of ancient pottery, and you can look suitably impressed." "I know pottery," Daphine said. "My husband's trade routes included ceramics from Greece and Egypt." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Even better, society will see an intelligent conversation and assume it's love. Perfect." They spent the rest of breakfast planning their strategy, and despite the absurdity of the situation, Daphine found herself relaxing. Margaret was warm and funny. Sebastian was surprisingly easy to talk to, and the whole thing felt less like a disaster and more like an adventure. When it was time to leave, Sebastian walked her to the door. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "For breakfast?" "Why not? We're married, apparently. We should probably get to know each other." "Practical as always," he said, smiling. "I'll have cook prepare extra sugar for your tea." It was a small thing, remembering how she took her tea. But it felt oddly intimate, this stranger who was now her husband, paying attention to such details. "Sebastian," she said, as she reached the door. "Yes?" Thank you for not letting me drown in scandal." His expression gentled. "You're welcome, though I suspect you're stronger than you think. You wouldn't have survived this past year otherwise." As her carriage pulled away from Kentmere House, Daphine realised something unexpected. For the first time in months, she felt something other than grief and exhaustion. She felt curious, interested, almost hopeful. She'd woken up married to a stranger. But perhaps, just perhaps, that stranger might become something more. 3. The museum outing became a weekly ritual. What started as a calculated public appearance transformed into something neither Daphine nor Sebastian had anticipated: genuine friendship. They walked through halls of ancient artifacts, while Daphine explained trade routes, and Sebastian offered historical context. Other visitors watched them with obvious curiosity, but after the first few times, Daphine stopped noticing. She was too absorbed in actual conversation with someone who listened without patronizing her. "You're wasting your talents on ledgers," Sebastian said one afternoon as they examined Egyptian pottery. "You should be writing about trade history." "Women don't write about trade history. Women don't run shipping businesses either, yet here you are." "Fair point," Daphine smiled despite herself. "Though I prefer numbers to words, numbers make sense. They don't lie or shift meaning depending on who's reading them." "Is that why you find comfort in your late husband's ledgers? Because numbers are reliable when everything else isn't?" The observation was too accurate. Daphine looked away, studying the pottery with sudden intense focus. "I should go. I have a meeting with a warehouse manager this afternoon." "Daphine," Sebastian's voice was gentle. "I didn't mean to pry." "You weren't. You were observant. It's disconcerting. I could say the same about you. You see through me rather better than I'd like." She glanced at him. "Do I? You know perfectly well that I hide behind political essays, because direct interaction is exhausting. You knew it the day we met." "You're very good at seeming confident," Daphine offered. "So are you. We're both excellent at pretending." They stood in the quiet museum, surrounded by artifacts of long-dead civilizations, and Daphine felt something shift between them. Not romance exactly, but recognition. Two people who understood loneliness and survival. "I haven't slept through the night since Thomas died," she admitted quietly. "I lie awake doing calculations in my head, because it's better than thinking about everything I've lost. I avoid attachment because caring about things means you can lose them," Sebastian said equally quietly. "It's safer to remain distant." "But lonely." "Yes, but lonely." A museum guard coughed politely, reminding them they weren't truly alone. The moment broke, and they continued walking, but something had been acknowledged between them. A truth that made the air feel less heavy. Their growing friendship did not go unnoticed. Society began to reconsider its initial scandalous interpretation. Whispers shifted from speculation about entrapment to curiosity about this unusual pair who seemed genuinely fond of each other. Then Lord Ashcombe decided to ruin everything. The rumour started circulating a week after their last museum visit. Ashcombe, a rival peer with political ambitions that conflicted with Sebastian's, let it be known that the hasty marriage had been staged. He suggested that Daphine had deliberately sought out the Duke at the ball, that she'd played on his sympathies to secure a title and fortune. "It's ridiculous," Margaret fumed when she brought the news to Daphine's townhouse. "Anyone with eyes can see you're not some scheming fortune hunter." "But people want to believe it," Daphine said wearily. "It's a better story than the truth." "What will you do?" "Nothing. What can I do? Protesting will only give the rumours more weight." "Sebastian wants to confront Ashcombe directly. He's furious." Daphine stood quickly. "He can't. That will make everything worse. She found Sebastian at his study in Kentmere House, drafting what appeared to be a scathing public letter. His anger was evident in every tense line of his body. "Don't," Daphine said from the doorway. He looked up. "He's maligning your character, our marriage. I won't stand for it." "So you'll defend me with rank and money? That will surely prove I didn't marry you for rank and money." "What would you have me do?" "Nothing. I'd have you think strategically instead of emotionally." Daphine crossed to his desk. "Ashcombe wants you to react. He wants you angry and defensive. Don't give him what he wants." "Then what do you suggest?" Daphine picked up the letter he'd been writing and skimmed it. Strong words, powerful argument, completely wrong approach. She set it down and met his eyes. "I suggest we expose him with facts instead of feelings." Over the next 3 days, Daphine did what she did best. She investigated. She reviewed records, cross-referenced dates, and followed trails of information until she found what she needed. The supposed eyewitness, who claimed to have seen her deliberately seek out Sebastian at the ball. He was on Ashcombe's payroll. The story of her desperate financial situation, fabricated by the same source. She presented her findings to Sebastian with the same calm efficiency she used for shipping manifests. "This is thorough," he said, impressed. "Numbers don't lie. Neither do employment records." Daphine smiled grimly. Ashcombe was sloppy. He didn't expect anyone to actually check his sources. "How do we use this?" "Quietly. We don't make accusations. We simply let certain key people know that the witness was unreliable. Gossip will do the rest." Within a week, the scandal had shifted. Whispers now suggested that Ashcombe had fabricated the story for political gain. Society, always eager for a new villain, turned its attention to him instead. The evening after Ashcombe's plot unravelled, Sebastian found Daphine in his library, reading one of his essays. "You were right," he said, settling into the chair across from her, thinking strategically instead of emotionally. "I've had practice. Running a business requires a cool head. It requires more than that. It requires brilliance." Daphine looked up, startled by the admiration in his voice. "I just did what needed to be done." "No, you did what no one else thought to do. You turned defense into investigation." He paused. "I tried to save you. You saved yourself." "We saved each other," Daphine corrected. "You gave me the stability to fight back. I gave you the strategy to win." "Partnership, then." "Partnership," she agreed. Rain started falling outside, sudden and heavy. Sebastian went to the window and watched it stream down the glass. "Stay for dinner," he said. "It's too miserable to go out in this weather." Daphine should have refused. She had work waiting at home, ledgers to review, correspondence to answer. But the library was warm, Sebastian's company was comfortable, and the thought of returning to her empty house held no appeal. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise not to serve anything fancy. I'm tired of pretending to know which fork to use." He laughed, surprised and genuine. "I think we can manage simple food." Dinner was indeed simple: roast chicken, bread, the vegetables. They ate in the small dining room, conversation flowing easily now that they'd weathered their first real crisis together. Sebastian told her about his latest essay, arguing for electoral reform. Daphine explained a complicated shipping problem she'd solved by rerouting through different ports. After dinner, they shared an umbrella for the short walk to her waiting carriage. Rain drummed on the silk canopy, creating a small, dry island in the downpour. Their shoulders brushed, and neither pulled away. "I'm beginning to think," Sebastian said quietly, "falling asleep on me was the cleverest thing you've ever done." Daphine looked up at him, rain misting her face despite the umbrella's protection. His dark eyes were warm in the streetlight, and she realized with a start that she'd stopped thinking of him as a convenient arrangement. He'd become something more, something precious. "Not the cleverest," she said. "That would be agreeing to marry you, even if we both thought it was temporary. And now? Now I'm not sure what I think, except that I'm glad you're in my life." Sebastian's smile was soft, almost wondering. "I'm glad you're in mine." He handed her into the carriage, and as it pulled away, Daphine touched her fingers to her lips, feeling the ghost of rain and the warmth of possibility. She'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woken up married. But somewhere between museum visits and strategic thinking, that stranger had become a friend. And perhaps, just perhaps, he might become something even more. 4. Trouble arrived with the spring flowers. Daphine was reviewing shipping manifests when Ellen announced a visitor, Lord Thomas Lorne, her late husband's brother. She hadn't seen him since the funeral, and his appearance now sent anxiety skittering down her spine. Thomas looked older than she remembered, his face lined with worry. He accepted tea but didn't drink it, just twisted the cup in his hands. "I need your help," he said without preamble. "The business is failing. I've tried, Daphine, truly I have, but I can't make the numbers work. Creditors are circling. We'll lose everything within a month if something doesn't change." Daphine felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. The shipping firm had been her late husband's pride, his legacy. She couldn't let it fail, even if it meant taking on more than she could carry. "Show me the books," she said. What she found was worse than she'd feared. Thomas had made desperate decisions, accepting poor terms, extending credit he couldn't afford. The firm was hemorrhaging money, drowning in debt it couldn't service. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "I was ashamed," Thomas admitted. "My brother built this business from nothing. I couldn't even keep it running for a year." Daphine spent 3 sleepless nights dissecting the problem. The solution was there, buried in the chaos. Restructure the routes, consolidate the ships, renegotiate with suppliers who valued long-term relationships over short-term profit. But it would require time, focus, and negotiating skills she wasn't sure she possessed. She didn't tell Sebastian. This was her problem, her late husband's legacy. She'd solved it herself. The warehouse meetings were brutal. Sea captains didn't want to take orders from a woman, even a duchess. Suppliers balked at renegotiating terms. Creditors threatened legal action. Daphine pushed through with sheer stubborn determination, working 18-hour days until her eyes burned and her hands shook from exhaustion. Sebastian noticed her absence immediately. She'd missed their last 3 breakfasts, hadn't appeared at the museum, and sent only brief notes claiming business kept her occupied. He found her at the shipping office on a grey Thursday morning, bent over ledgers with ink stains on her fingers and circles under her eyes that spoke of too little sleep and too much worry. "Daphine." She looked up, startled. "Sebastian, what are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife, who seems to have disappeared." He took in the chaos of papers, the exhaustion in her face, and his expression hardened. "What's happened?" "Nothing I can't handle." "That's not what I asked." Daphine set down her pen with deliberate care. "The shipping firm is in trouble. Thomas mismanaged it while I was grieving, and now I'm trying to save it before we lose everything." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "It's not your problem. You're my wife. Your problems are my problems." "This is a business arrangement, remember." The words came out sharper than she intended, sharpened by exhaustion and frustration. "We agreed. Separate lives. Minimal obligation." Sebastian's jaw tightened. Is that truly what you think, after these past months? I don't know what I think anymore. I just know I can't add failing at this to everything else I've failed at. Failed at? He moved closer, his voice incredulous. Daphine, you've survived widowhood, scandal, and now you're single-handedly saving a failing business. What part of that is failure? The part where I can't do it alone, but I'm too proud to admit it. Her voice cracked. The part where I'm drowning again. And I don't know how to ask for help without feeling like I'm betraying Thomas's memory by needing someone else. The admission hung in the air between them. Daphine pressed her hands to her face, horrified that she'd said so much, revealed so much weakness. Then don't ask, Sebastian said quietly. I'm offering. Not as your husband in name, but as your partner. Let me help. You're a duke. You don't negotiate with warehouse clerks. No, but I can provide capital, connections, and a title that makes people take you seriously. You provide the strategy and knowledge. Isn't that what partnership means? Daphine lowered her hands and looked at him properly. His dark eyes were steady, no pity in them, only respect and something that might have been affection. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much about this? Because watching you negotiate with suppliers and argue shipping routes is the most fascinating thing I've witnessed in years. Because you're brilliant at this and you shouldn't have to fight alone. And because somewhere in these past months you stopped being a convenient arrangement and became someone I can't imagine not having in my life. The honesty in his words made her chest ache. I'm not ready, she whispered, to be someone's wife again, to open my heart like that. Then don't be ready. Just let me stand beside you while you save this business. We'll worry about the rest later. It was too tempting. The offer of partnership without pressure, support without strings. Daphine had been carrying everything alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to share the weight. All right, she said finally. Help me. They worked together for the next 2 weeks. Sebastian used his connections to secure better credit terms. His presence at meetings made suppliers reconsider their positions. No one wanted to alienate a duke. But he never took over, never pushed Daphine aside. He simply created space for her expertise to shine. Slowly, painfully, the business began to stabilize. Routes were restructured. Creditors agreed to payment plans. The bleeding stopped. Through it all, Sebastian was there, not as her saviour, but as her partner. He brought her meals when she forgot to eat, reviewed her proposals, and asked intelligent questions, reminded her to sleep when she tried to work through the night. One evening, Daphine looked up from her desk to find him reading in the corner of the office, keeping her company without demanding attention. Something in her chest loosened, warmed. Why are you really doing this? She asked. He looked up from his book. I told you. No, the real reason, not the pretty words about partnership. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then, because you remind me that feeling things isn't weakness. Because you're brave enough to grieve openly and love fiercely and fight for what matters. And because when I'm with you, I'm not the cold duke everyone expects. I'm just Sebastian, and that's enough. Daphine's throat tightened. I'm still scared. Of what? Of caring too much, of losing someone again, of opening my heart and having it shattered. So am I, Sebastian admitted. But I'm beginning to think that avoiding pain isn't the same as living. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me everything that matters. They held each other's gaze across the cluttered office, and Daphine felt the last of her walls beginning to crack. This man, who had started as a stranger, become a friend, was now something more, something precious and terrifying and utterly necessary. But before she could find words for what she felt, Thomas burst through the door, his face pale with panic. "Daphine, Ashcombe has filed a petition with the church. He's claiming your marriage is invalid. The license was improperly signed, he says. If he's right, everything we've worked for your reputation, the business deals, all of it collapses." The floor dropped out from under Daphine's world. She'd survived scandal, grief, and near bankruptcy. But this could destroy everything she'd built, everything she'd fought to protect. "Let him try," Sebastian said, his voice cold and hard. "We'll fight him." But as Daphine looked at the determination in his face, she realized something that terrified her more than scandal or ruin. She couldn't imagine facing this fight without him. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped surviving alone and started living with someone else. And if Ashcombe succeeded, she'd lose not just her reputation, but the man who'd become her home. 5. The church inquiry moved with agonizing slowness. Ashcombe had found an obscure technicality the vicar who'd married them hadn't properly registered with the diocese. It was nonsense, but it was enough to raise questions, and questions were poison in London society. "We could remarry," Sebastian suggested one morning over breakfast. They'd returned to their ritual, though now Daphine stayed late into the evenings, neither quite willing to acknowledge why. "That would look like we're admitting the first marriage was invalid," Daphine said. "It would give Ashcombe exactly what he wants. Then we fight the petition and drag this through the courts for months while gossip destroys everything we've built." She set down her teacup too hard. "There's no good answer." Margaret entered with her usual lack of ceremony. "Actually, there might be. I've been doing some digging into our dear Lord Ashcombe." "Margaret," Sebastian began warningly. "Oh, hush, I'm being entirely legal, mostly." She spread papers on the table. "Ashcombe's petition? It's based on documents he claims prove the vicar's registration lapsed. But look at the dates." Daphine leaned forward, her practiced eye catching the discrepancy immediately. "These are backdated. The registration shows as expired before it was actually filed." "Exactly. Which means someone altered the records." "Ashcombe," Sebastian breathed. "Almost certainly, but we need proof." Margaret looked at Daphine. "Which is where your particular skills come in handy. Can you trace document forgery the same way you trace shipping fraud?" Daphine's mind was already racing. Paper stock, inconsistency, handwriting analysis. Yes. If these documents were altered, I can prove it. She spent 3 days buried in church archives, comparing records with an intensity that impressed even the elderly clerks. Sebastian stayed with her, fetching documents and providing second opinions on questionable dates. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Daphine realized this was what partnership truly meant. Not grand gestures, just quiet presence and shared purpose. On the 3rd day, she found it. The smoking gun, buried in a ledger of administrative notes. The registration hadn't been expired. When they married, it had been deliberately altered weeks later. The changes made in different ink, with shaky handwriting that didn't match the original clerk's careful script. "Got him," Daphine said softly. Sebastian looked over her shoulder at the evidence. "You're certain?" "Completely. This is forgery. Clumsy forgery at that." Margaret took the evidence to the church authorities herself, presenting it with the devastating efficiency that made her one of London's most formidable society women. The inquiry collapsed within days. Ashcombe, faced with proof of his deception, withdrew his petition and left London entirely, his reputation in tatters. The scandal transformed overnight. Instead of questionable marriage, society now whispered about the Duchess, who'd outsmarted a peer with nothing but ledgers and determination. Daphine found herself invited to events she'd never have been welcomed at before, wealthy women seeking her advice on their own business dealings. "You're becoming fashionable," Sebastian observed one evening, as they reviewed yet another invitation. "I'm becoming useful," Daphine corrected. "Women want to know how I survived widowhood and business difficulties. I'm proof it's possible." "You're proof of many things." He set down the invitation and looked at her properly. "Daphine, we need to talk about what happens next." Her heart lurched. "What do you mean?" "I mean the scandal is over. The business is stable. The reasons for our arrangement no longer exist." He paused. "We agreed this would be temporary." "Of course." The arrangement. Daphine had been so focused on fighting Ashcombe that she'd forgotten they'd always planned for this marriage to end. Separate lives. Minimal obligation. That was the agreement. "Right," she said, her voice careful. "Of course. So, I need to know." Sebastian's dark eyes held hers. "Do you still want that? A quiet separation? A discreet ending?" Daphine looked at this man, who'd become everything she never knew she needed, who'd stood beside her through scandal and struggle, who'd made her laugh and challenged her mind, who'd given her space to grieve and strength to fight. "No," she whispered, "I don't want that at all." "Thank God," Sebastian breathed and crossed the room to her. "Because I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that somewhere between museum visits and shipping negotiations, I fell completely in love with you." "I can't replace him," Daphine said, the fear finally spoken aloud. "Your late husband? I don't want you to. He was part of your life, part of who you are. I'm not asking you to forget him or pretend he didn't matter." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking if there's room in your heart for new love alongside old grief. I'm asking if we can transform this arrangement into something real. I'm asking you to marry me, Daphine. Not as protection or convenience, but because I love you and I want to spend my life making you happy." Tears blurred her vision. "I'm still scared." "So am I. But I'm more scared of never taking this chance." Daphine thought of Thomas, his memory cherished but no longer raw. She thought of the year she'd spent surviving, and these past months of learning to live again. She thought of Sebastian's patient kindness, his quiet strength, the way he'd never tried to save her, but simply stood beside her while she saved herself. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. Again, for real this time." His kiss was gentle and sure, tasting of tea and promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "Should we tell Margaret?" Daphine asked. "She already knows. She probably knew before we did." They planned a small ceremony at dawn, because that's when their story had truly begun. Just close friends, no grand spectacle. The same chapel where they'd signed hasty papers 6 months ago, but this time with joy instead of desperation. Daphine wore blue instead of grey, finally stepping beyond mourning into new life. Sebastian's vows were simple but devastating in their honesty. "I promise to listen before trying to rescue you. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you. I promise to love you through grief and joy, through easy days and hard ones. I promise to be your partner in all things, as you've been mine." Daphine's voice shook as she spoke her own promises. "I vow to trust you with my heart, even though hearts can break. I vow to lean on you when I'm tired, and to let you lean on me in return. I vow to love you fiercely and honestly, and to never forget that the best things in life often arrive when we least expect them." When the vicar pronounced them married again, properly, permanently, the small congregation applauded. Margaret cried happy tears. Even Thomas Lorne, invited at Daphine's insistence, smiled with genuine joy. They took their wedding breakfast on the chapel steps as dawn light turned London gold, sharing tea and jam in their wedding clothes, while the city woke around them. Sebastian offered her his shoulder. For when the world tires you. Only if you promise not to call it a scandal, Daphine said, smiling. Never a scandal, he agreed. A beginning. She rested her head against his shoulder, this time entirely awake and aware, and choosing to be there. The bells chimed overhead, marking the hour, marking this moment when two lonely people decided to be lonely together no longer. I love you, she said quietly. I love you too, Sebastian replied, even though you did fall asleep on me at a ball. Especially because I fell asleep on you at a ball. They sat in comfortable silence, as London came alive around them, the city carrying on with its usual business, while two people marked the beginning of something new. Not a fairy tale, not perfection, just two imperfect souls who'd stumbled into partnership and discovered it might be better than either had dreamed. Daphine had fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woken married, but through months of friendship, partnership, and gradual trust, that stranger had become her home, and she was finally, completely awake. If this story of unexpected second chances and love born from impossible circumstances touched your heart, please show your support with a like or subscribe. Your engagement helps me bring you more tales of hope, healing, and hearts finding their way home. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. What did you think of Daphine and Sebastian's journey? Did their partnership give you hope? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing which moments resonated most with you. Until our next story, dear listeners, may you find your own unexpected beginnings. This is your storyteller, reminding you that sometimes the best chapters begin when you least expect them.